Hello everyone. This is my presentation. I'm trying to do something a little different. It's going to be online through a YouTube channel and also through a narrated PowerPoint presentation. I never did this before, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to try and do this. So again, this is assignment 3 of Education 5103. There's the title, Integration of Instructional Design and Information Technology. So it's due June 14th overall, the position paper, but the presentation is due today. It's June 2nd. I guess whoever's watching, I hope you enjoy this. Now the title is, Could the Implementation of Flow Theory Promote Improved Student Engagement in Learning? So, who am I? Well, I'm Chad Hanrahan. This is me on the right with my wife Tanya. I'm from North Sydney, Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm a middle school French immersion math and science teacher with the Cape Breton District School Board. So I'm in course 3 of this Diploma of Educational Technology at CBU. That's Cape Breton University. So the purpose of this presentation, as well as to just try something different because I can't do this face-to-face, it's also to illustrate what I'm learning in this course of instructional design. So as said before, in this course I've encountered a lot, or a plethora of techniques and theory related to instructional design. First of all, instructional design is very different for me. I'm learning a lot, and a lot of these different ways that people learn. It's actually quite fascinating, but the one that I found the most fascinating was done by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he was in charge of figuring out flow theory. Now, it's a fascinating instructional design theory for helping people learn, and I wanted to explore its implementation within classroom instruction a little further. So the specific purpose of this presentation is to research the effects of implementing flow theory as an instructional design technique to promote improved student engagement in educational endeavors. It sounds like a mouthful, but it's essentially, could this learning theory help improve motivation? So now the position paper will be a lot more thorough. It's in between 800 and 2,000 words, and a lot more technical in its writing. So I try to take the major tenets of that and put it into this presentation format. So I guess here we go. So as I said before, this presentation will accompany a formal written position paper addressing this concept in instructional design. This presentation has been constructed in the same format as my paper. So here's how the paper would lay out. Be an introduction, there'd be a literature review and analysis section, there'd be a conclusion, and then there'd be references and a post-presentation discussion. Now, the post-presentation discussion would be during the online session after this presentation. I would assume during the chat session or in the chat session spot. Now, we use Blackboard Collaborate. The new program would have something similar, I imagine. Anyways, if you were watching this online, and maybe if you got the actual PowerPoint itself, the slides 5 through 15 would be the introduction. The literature review and analysis section would be slides 16 through 21. The conclusion is slide 22, and the references slide 23. I have here on number 4, that's the bottom thing would be the number, so I guess the first one would be 1, and that would be back in the first title page. So, the role of instructional design within our educational system. Well, first of all, it's essential that the instruction of school curriculum is improved through the analysis of learning needs and systematic development of learning materials. This is a definition that I kind of understood from being a teacher, but the actual formal definition was something I never really put into words nor really thought about directly. So in this course, instructional design has allowed me to think more about that. So basically, the teacher and or the instructional designer, what we're learning is they're separate, but they also can be the same. So hopefully as the teacher, as I learn more, I'll become more of an instructional designer. And one of the goals is to always be implementing various technological and multimedia tools to deliver course content that properly motivates the learner. So kids nowadays, these students work in a much more technologically advanced society that we did. I'm about 40 years old, so when I graduated in 1993, technology was nowhere near what it is now. So to meet these people, it's probably best to use the tools that they use regularly. So Through using those tools, I believe they can be properly motivated, and as I stated here in the last part of this PowerPoint presentation, this last bulletin, only when proper motivation is achieved does true learning engagement commence. And I do believe that. I've read some literature in the past few courses about that, and if you do teach, you can see it's pretty evident. And if you're not a teacher and you're studying to be a teacher, you'll also notice that when you do your practicums and when you teach for the first time in the classroom yourself. So how can we improve student engagement? Well, first of all, a teacher and/or instructional designer who is attentive to optimizing student motivation tries to select activities that engage student interests, allow for individual creativity, and more importantly, permits demonstration of content expertise. This is a lot easier said than done, but as you get to know students, you seem to kind of gauge where their interests lie, and you can kind of start picking and choosing things that apply best to the group. I mean, you don't like to teach to a group, you want to teach to individuals, but when you have big numbers, it's tough. But as I get better at this, I'm over 10 years in, I'm realizing what works, what doesn't work, what's absolutely necessary to be done, and what maybe you can modify or tweak to make a little bit more enjoyable. Now, what I do notice, though, in our traditional system of educating youth, like the behaviorist model of reward and punishment, it doesn't really engage their interests as thoroughly as it once did. So I guess it's our challenge as educators to establish a more effective learning theory to promote student engagement. So we're always trying to get better as teachers to figure out how to help kids learn better. So learning different theories of how they learn probably could help engage them better. So this is what I've discovered. Basically, is a change in learning theories necessary? To properly engage students in the 21st century, the educational paradigm shift from behaviorist theory towards alternative learning theories is inevitable. And for this reason, I came across this flow theory, and that's something that I think if you implemented into the instructional design of a course curriculum could possibly help with this not setback, more this concern about student engagement. Now, if you see this gentleman's name, I know what it is. It's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's very, very challenging word to say. I actually had to look it up online a few times and listen to it and practice it myself. So I'll say it again just for people that's wondering. His name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and it's Czechoslovakian in nature. So you're probably wondering, what is flow theory? Well, flow theory is the mental state of operation in which a person in performing an activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, full involvement and enjoyment in the process of activity. So, as I say, named by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the concept has been widely referenced across a variety of fields, particularly the field of education. Now, most people that discuss it in the positive psychology realms, they call it as being in flow or in the zone. This is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi right there. He actually gave a very interesting talk on TED Talks. I had the actual website in my references. I was having a hard time uploading it properly, so I'm not really able to show it within the PowerPoint presentation. However, in the reference notes, if you want to know more about him or his flow theory, you can easily put that website into your browser and find that pretty simply, I would believe. I watched it. It was actually quite informative. So if this does interest you further, I recommend watching that. Pardon me. The historical background of flow theory. Well, of course, it's always good to look into the history of how these ideas come about. I always find that interesting, especially with words. If you know the nature of the word, it helps you kind of understand the nature of the word better and its definition. So the historical background of flow theory, when I dug a little deeper, the development of flow theory was inspired by various artists who would immerse themselves so deeply into their work that they would disregard food, rest, and social engagements. They essentially were lost in their work. So when Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and his colleagues discovered these traits in artists, they thought it was actually quite interesting to research, so they decided to do this in the 80s and 90s, and their research and developments led to the principles of flow theory. So as I mentioned, flow theory is known as being in the zone or in flow. So that's a pretty important word. I think it's best to describe what is flow. So according to Csikszentmihalyi, flow is one of the 8 mental states that a student can experience during the learning process. So this diagram shows the 8 mental states of flow theory. I thought it was nice. I had some color in it, and it kind of brought forth these words instead of just listing them. So I have a list on the left-hand side, and they are flow, anxiety, apathy, arousal, boredom, control, relaxation, and worry. Some of them words are actually quite menacing. Some of them aren't too dreadful. The optimum one, as I'll discuss later, is flow. Now the other ones are less than optimal. So anxiety, apathy, arousal, boredom, control, relaxation, worry. Those are the ones that we try to avoid in flow theory, as I will talk about right now. So how does a student achieve flow? Well, flow is considered the most favorable mental state in this particular theory. Flow is achieved by the learner when his or her skill level and challenge level are at their highest. So what I mean by that is when they're being challenged, but their skill level can meet the challenge. So when they're both at the highest levels, that's when they discover that they're in flow. And that's when they start to really become engaged and motivated. So as my last bulletin there says, as a student achieve a proper flow in the subject of study, an opportunity for intense focus is created and motivation begins shifting from extrinsic origins into more optimal intrinsic domains. So extrinsic, if those words aren't familiar, that'd be like you do it because you want to get a good mark, or your mother and father said do better in school and we don't want anything less than an 80%. So extrinsic means there's some other exterior factor pushing you to do better or to keep a status quo. Intrinsic motivation is from within. You're doing well because you want to. It's not about marks or I want to go outside on the weekends so I better do well in this test. It's I want to know more about this because I like this. That's true motivation, and I think that's where we need to go as a group of educators trying to help kids learn things more appropriately. So other possible mental states of students. So if flow can't be achieved, as it says, flow is not the optimal mental state, then the other mental states occur when flow is not achieved. That's logical. So the 2 most common examples are the following. So a learner can experience relaxation or boredom in learning when his or her skill level is high yet the presented task challenge is low. We see that every day when we go to school. We see kids that are, as we always say, not working to their potential. It's not so much not working to potential. I think perhaps their skill level is so high that the tasks are just not challenging enough. Now the other one is a little bit more, not upsetting, but it's tough to work with at times. It's when the learner experiences anxiety when their skill level is very low and the presented task challenge is very high. Number 2 is what we see most commonly in a school classroom. So this work is just too much of a challenge because their skill levels they're bringing from other grades or from that particular grade is just not high enough to meet those expectations within the challenge. So this is a student learning and engagement diagram. So essentially it shows student learning engagement when flow theory is applied as an instructional design technique. As you can see, there's the skills on the horizontal axis, challenges on the top, or more specifically the vertical axis, and they have those keywords: anxiety, apathy, boredom, and flow. So if you see how they all connect, flow is kind of like in between all 3. So it can't be too high and it can't be too low, and as far as skill level, and basically the challenge can't be too low and can't be too high. So if you had, say, a low challenge and a low skill, you'd get apathy. Now if the skill is very high but the challenge is very low, you get boredom. Now if the skill is low and the challenge is high, you get anxiety. When you're a nice mix, you are in flow. Okay. So literary review and analysis. So this is the I wouldn't say the technical part, but this is the part of the presentation paper where I would discuss more specifically research that would support it. So I went online and I went through the Ask Eric websites, and I went through several literature, and I came across 5 specific ones that kind of supported or connected the idea of student engagement with flow theory. So they're listed on the right hand side. There's game, motivation, and effective learning, an integrated model for educational game design. There's targeting motivation, adapting flow theory to instructional design. There's student engagement in high school classrooms from the perspective of flow theory. And then there's flow theory as a model for enhancing student resilience. The last one is the importance of motivation, integrating flow theory into instructional design. Now, how I'm going to go about doing this, and I hope this is logically built, at least it was to me when I tried to build it, and I threw it by some people before I decided to narrate and put this online, but I discussed the findings of each paper as a separate slide. So for instance, the first one, game, motivation, and effective learning, an integrated model for educational game design. This paper was written by Brad Paris and Jim Buzzacchi in 2005. Now the researchers, they've recognized flow theory as a definitive factor in developing, understanding, and implementing motivation. However, they also felt a secondary factor was necessary to improve student learning and motivation. That was reflection of learning. So it was important for the student to reflect upon what they were learning. Just being involved in the activity and doing that all the time without reflecting didn't lead to learning. They liked what they were doing, they were having fun with what they were doing, but they didn't reflect enough to really understand how it all fit together. So a secondary factor was necessary. That's reflection. So in conclusion, this study revealed how games can act as effective learning environments by integrating reflection into the process of flow theory, producing intrinsically motivating learning experiences, which I think all teachers are striving to do within their classroom. Now the second article, Targeting Motivation, Adapting Flow Theory to Instructional Design, was written by Tom S. Chan and Terrence C. Ahern in 1999. These researchers investigated the effect of activity content, its presentation, and the interactions between the two on flow experience, i.e. intrinsic motivation in instructional activity. Now what they discovered after doing their not experiments, but when they did their research and they tabulated their data, they suggested, my apologies, their study suggested that activity content has major influences on motivation. The hypermedia presentations can add to motivation if used appropriately, or they can be distracting if too complex. Essentially what that means is too much media within the presentation can work, but if it's too much happening at once, if the procedures are too intricately designed and complex, they actually become distracting, and you're almost focusing more on the presentation other than the learning going on or the information being presented. Now the third paper, written by David J. Chernoff, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, Barbara Schneider, and Eliza Steele Chernoff in 2003, is student engagement in high school classrooms from the perspective of flow theory. Now this study investigated how adolescents spent their time in high school and the conditions under which they reported being engaged. I think this was, of all of them, I liked this one the most when I read it because it kind of tied into students that I work with almost directly. I do middle school, mainly grade 9, and they're going off to high school, and I talk to a lot of former students that are in high school now, and it's interesting to see what kind of subjects they find engaging, what teachers they find engaging, what activities they find engaging. So this paper kind of helped me figure them out a little bit better. Now, what they determined in their paper was that participants experienced increased engagement when the perceived challenge of the task and their own skills were high and in balance. The instruction was relevant and the learning environment was under their control. So essentially, if flow theory was applied properly, that theory seemed to work with them really well, and they were engaged much more effectively than in classes that followed different learning theories. The next one was Flow Theory as a Model for Enhancing Student Resilience. Flow Theory as a Model for Enhancing Student Resilience was written by Gerald D. Parr, Marilyn Montgomery, and Camille DeBell in 1998. Their researcher investigated and described the characteristics of resilience and its connection to flow theory. Resilience is, I always think of resilience as they won't be denied. Like even when things are very tough, they're always positive, they're always working, they're always trying to do their best, and they don't get down. And it's a very important skill to have in the school system, especially as a student, because sometimes there are times where you don't succeed, and if you can't handle being unsuccessful, or I guess the dreaded failure word, if you can't handle failure, life is part of, like, life has failures. If not to be able to deal with those, it makes your life very difficult. I see a lot of students nowadays, and they get very upset when they even do slight things wrong. They're almost like perfectionists, and I like seeing how they grow from 7 through 8 through 9, and I see them going from little kids that just refuse to make a mistake to taking risks and challenging themselves and not being scared of failure, because they know that failure is just one part of the process in learning things truly appropriately. So this research paper, it concluded that counseling from a flow theory perspective can assist students in order to, sorry, my apologies, I'll start that again. This paper concluded that counseling from a flow theory perspective can assist students to order their consciousness so they can develop ever-increasing levels of complexity, thus becoming more academically resilient. I found that a little bit challenging to process myself, so I'll try and do this in a little bit more clear. So basically, if these students were counseled from a flow theory perspective, how they were able to do, what they could do is they could order their consciousness to basically appreciate more and more complexity in their worlds and be able to deal with not understanding things as appropriately. So instead of getting frustrated because they didn't understand everything right away, they were able to realize that this is a process, and as long as they have fun and they engage themselves with it, the learning will come. And by understanding that and working with their frustrations and trying to control them and having positive feelings toward it, they were actually becoming more resilient academically. Now, the last of these papers, The Importance of Motivation Integrating Flow Theory into Instructional Design, was written by Tom S. Chan and Terence C. Ahern in 1999. The goal of their study was an exploratory adaptation of flow theory for designing instructional activities. A secondary goal of their study explored how to use flow theory and its effects on motivation in a classroom setting. So this paper had two goals. Now, what did they discover was the following. This study generated less than optimal conditions, suggesting that implementation of flow theory into instructional design had a negative correlation with student engagement and learning. This one was a little bit interesting, and that's why I included it, because we just read a paper just a couple slides past with the same authors, Tom S. Chan and Terence C. Ahern. And this one had less than encouraging results, a negative correlation, meaning that flow theory helped not to build motivation, but they actually diminished it. So I thought it was interesting to include this because sometimes there are contradictory thoughts on a certain idea, and I felt it was necessary to include one of those contradictory thoughts. So in conclusion, basically, I never did a position paper like this before, so I didn't really know how to state the results. So I assumed the conclusion would be, did I answer the question? And the question was, could flow theory within a curriculum's instructional design framework help with student motivation? So what I found in this literary review was that there is a positive correlation between the usage of flow theory within a curriculum's instructional design framework and student motivation. Now, that's technical math stuff. Positive correlation would be if you increase the usage of flow theory, you would increase the motivation of the student. So if you know anything about mathematics, it would look like a linear line that's sloping upward as you go further left and up. So if you went along the horizontal axis to the left, or sorry, my apologies, to the right, and then you moved upward, you'd see a positive slope, so almost like going uphill. That's called positive correlation. So therefore, research supports the notion that the implementation of flow theory within a classroom curriculum can promote improved student engagement in educational endeavors. Now, obviously, these are not appropriately designed references and resources. The APA 6 format is what I would use in my actual position paper. I just felt it was good to list the resources that I used the most. There are further ones that I kind of use just to kind of get an idea how to word this presentation and position paper, and I would include those more in the position paper itself. But here are the basic references and resources. There's clearly eric.ed. www.eduk.gov. Then there's www.instructionaldesign. Then there's strengthening student engagement, what students want. Then there's learningtheories.com that talks about flow theory. And then there's I've threw in the TED Talks presentation by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, just in case someone wanted to copy and paste that into their browser and check it out. And then there was his actual book, The Flow Experience and Its Significance for Human Psychology, and the 5 papers I did my literary review and analysis on. So, questions, comments, constructive advice. Well, this is pretty much it for my presentation. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching if you're watching this on YouTube. Now, this aspect of the presentation will be conducted online in the 5-minute post-presentation discussion hosted in the chat room. I don't know how that's going to go about, but when we get there on June 2nd, today, I guess we'll figure that out. Now, if you need to contact me, maybe you want my presentation or you have to ask me more questions, feel free to contact me at henrek@gnespes.ca or on Twitter at @infotainer24. And don't forget your capitals. I think it's case sensitive. So that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I enjoyed doing it. I learned a lot about technology and flow theory, and I hope to someday implement these ideas into my own teaching. Have a nice day. This is it for my presentation. Thank you for listening.